As a nurse, your profession is to prevent disease, to preserve life. To a nurse, the effects of napalm on human beings is apparent. Think of children and women bombed by napalm, burned alive by a substance which does not roll off. It is a jelly. It adheres. It continues to burn. This is inhuman, absolutely. To pour napalm on pieces of paper is certainly preferable to using it on human beings. When you see the imperative put on it.
And what imperative?
That you act on what you say you believe. This is what it means to be a Christian. This is what Christ meant when he lived. We have not only to talk, but if we see something wrong, we have to be willing to do something about it. This is my belief. What I really wanted to do, what I was saying by pouring napalm on draft files, is that I wish to celebrate life, not engage in a dance of death.
It would be to do what?
I was saving my soul. I had a choice between saving my soul and losing it.
Mr. Melville, in fact, for your wife and yourself, the basic motivation for going to Catonsville and burning the files was not Vietnam, but American interference in Guatemala. Isn't that right?
No.
That is not right.
No, we came to certain conclusions in Guatemala and applied them very personally to the people of Guatemala, but we feel just as deeply about what we are doing in Vietnam.
There comes a moment when you decide that some things should not be, and you have to try to act to stop these things.
If there were a group of children walking along the street, returning home from school, and a car came down the street out of control, even though there was a driver in that car, if I could divert the car from crashing into those children, I would feel an obligation to turn that car from its path. And I know, too, that if I were driving that car, I would hope and pray to God that somebody could smash the car so that I might not destroy those children.
Mr. Hogan, if you could sum up your intent in going to Catonsville, how would you express it?
I just want to let people live. That's all.
I did not hear it.
I said, I want to let people live. That's all.
David Darst came in, leaving his studies at St. Louis University, his Harvard future, and looking so clean-cut, he was thought to be a plant.
To stop the machine I saw moving and killing, to hinder the war effort in an actual physical, literal way, to raise a cry, an outcry over what I saw as a very, very clear crime.
Did he say crime?
Clearly a crime, a clear and wanton slaughter. We have not been able to let sacred life and total death live together quietly within us. My thinking is part of an ethic found in the New Testament that has always drawn the line between people and things. It says that material things are for the use of people, but that people are sacred. They are absolutely ends in themselves. They cannot be used as means. Our point is that we were destroying property at the draft board, which is desecrating the most sacred property, life.
We do not consider ourselves as having committed a crime.
You are going to have to explain, please, how you distinguish violating the law from having committed a crime.
Yes, we violated the law, but the law is no absolute to us. I must say that our intention was to destroy the files, but our motive was to illustrate genocide in Vietnam and corruption at home. The real issue is, how can we serve love and war? The fact is we can't. Most Americans have great difficulty seeing the I, the self, as being the we, humanity. We cannot feel the effects of our actions as others see us. We think we can rape a people and have them love us. We cannot ravage the ecology of Indochina, kill 10 civilians for every soldier, and expect anything but do or die opposition. We cannot fight the abstraction of communism by killing the people who believe in it. We cannot talk peace while our deeds give lie to our words. We can't have it both ways. The point at issue for us personally when we went to Catonsville was not leniency or punishment, not being a danger to the community or a benefit to it, but what it means to be a democratic person and a Christian person. American treat it as it wills, if it can find justice for us and for the growing numbers who refuse complicity in its crime, then it will show a stamina in accord with its national creed. If it cannot, then its cup of violence will fill up and up, finally to brim over. And at that mysterious point, we defendants will have been proven right in choosing revolution over reform.
Revolution.
I use the term revolution as it employed by adherents of the gospel and students of Gandhi on the human level. People cannot develop until they change. They cannot grow into humanity. They cannot join the human race unless they change. Such change is revolution. We hope to continue making a non-violent contribution to it.
I was the last of the 9 who agreed to go to Catonsville. I sat up with Philip through a long night, resisting. Suddenly I saw my sweet skin was hiding behind others.
Father Berrigan, after you were ordained in 1952,
It is too far back.
It was an important year for me, Your Honor. I was transformed politically, a historic year. We have all come here by different roads, and this is mine. I was sent to France as the colonial war in Southeast Asia came to a last act at Dien Bien Phu. There was an exciting movement in the French church then, known as the worker priests. A large band of these priests received permission to work in the factories and docks and mines, learning what it was to live with the people and not apart from them. They began to understand Christianity anew and tried to translate it anew. But our icebox Pope, Pius XII, dissolved the movement in one swift stroke.
We are not trying the worker priest movement of France.
I only meant to say, Your Honor, it radicalized me, gave me a practical vision of the church as she should be, woke me to the evils of colonialism, a historic year.
We must move forward.
In 1961, I turned the altar around and said the Mass in English. The kids and I felt that for the first time in 1,000 years, we were building community around the altar.
Father Berrigan, we must.
In 1964, Your Honor, I was invited to South Africa. I had about 2 weeks of intense exposure to a segregationist police state. At one meeting in Durban, I remember the question being raised: what happens to our children if things go so badly that we have to go to jail? I remember saying I could not answer that question, not being a citizen of that country, but I could perhaps help by reversing the question. What happens to us and our children if we do not go to jail? I was coming to realize what it might cost to be a Christian.
1964.
I was becoming convinced that the war in Vietnam would inevitably worsen. I felt that a cloud no larger than a man's hand would shortly cover the sky. I began to say no to the war, knowing that if I delayed too long, I would never find the courage to say no. Cardinal Spellman was still alive. He had always supported American wars. He believed, I think this supports his thought, that the highest expression of faith for an American Christian was to support our military. By his Christmas visits to our troops across the world, particularly in Vietnam, he placed an official seal of approval on our military adventure.
We are not trying.
I had to say no to that too. I had to say no to the church. Finally, in the autumn of 1965, I was exiled from the United States to Latin America.
What do you mean, exile?
Sent out, Your Honor, with no return ticket.
You mean the government of the United States exiled you?
No, it was a simple arrangement between the cardinal and my Jesuit superiors. As one of my friends expressed it, sending me to Latin America was a little like tossing Brer Rabbit into the briar patch. I visited 10 countries in 4.5 months. In Mexico, a student said to me, "We hate you, North Americans, with all our hearts. But we know that if you do not make it, we all come down. We are all doomed." I felt my conscience being pushed forward.
We are only in 1965. We must come closer to Catonsville.
Yes, sir. In 1968, an invitation came from the government of North Vietnam. Professor Howard Zinn and myself were invited to Hanoi to bring home 3 captive American airmen. I think we were the first Americans to undergo an American bombing attack. When the burned draft files were brought into court yesterday as evidence, I could not but recall that I had seen in the Hanoi evidence of a very different nature. I saw not boxes of burned papers. I saw parts, human bodies preserved in alcohol, the bodies of children, the hearts and organs and limbs of women, teachers, workers, peasants, bombed in fields and churches and schools and hospitals. It was clear to me during the 3 years of air war, America had been experimenting upon the bodies of the innocent. We had improved our weapons on their flesh.
He did not see this firsthand. He is telling the things he was told in Hanoi about some things that were preserved in alcohol.
French, English, Swedish experts, doctors testified that they were actually the bodies whose pictures accompanied the exhibits. The meaning of the air war in the North was deliberate, systematic destruction.
We are not trying the air war in North Vietnam.
I must protest the effort to discredit me on the stand. I am speaking of what I saw. There is a consistent effort here to say that I did not see it.
You can say what you saw, but the best evidence of what some crime commission found is what they said, and not a summary you can give in this court.
So be it. In any case, we brought the flyers home. As a result of the trip to Hanoi and of my brother's act of pouring blood on the draft records, I understood the limits of what I had done before and the next step that must come.
And was there anything else that determined you to act at Catonsville?
Yes. Another event, the self-immolation of a high school student in Syracuse, New York, in the spring of 1968. This boy had come to a point of despair about the war. He had gone into the Catholic cathedral, drenched himself with kerosene, and immolated himself in the street. He was still living a month later when I visited him in the hospital. I smelled the odor of burned flesh and understood anew what I had seen in Vietnam. This boy was dying in torment, his body like a piece of meat upon a grill. He died shortly thereafter. I thought that my senses had been invaded in a new way. I understood again the power of death in the modern world. This boy's death was being multiplied 1,000-fold in the land of burning children. So I went to Catonsville and burned some papers, because the burning of children is inhuman and unbearable. I went to Catonsville because I had gone to Hanoi.
You must speak more directly to the issue.
I went to Catonsville because my brother is a man and I must be a man.
To the specific issue.
Because I could not go on announcing the gospel from a pedestal. I was threatened with verbalizing my moral substance out of existence. So I went to Hanoi, and then to Catonsville, and that is why I am here.
You will tell us exactly why. Why you went. Exactly.
I did not want the children or the grandchildren of the jury or of the judge to be burned with napalm.
You say your intention was to save the children, or the jury, and myself, when you burned the records? That is what I heard you say. I asked if you meant that.
I meant that, of course. I meant that, or I would not say it.
You cannot invent arguments now that you would like to have had in your mind then.
Your Honor, my intention on that day was to save the innocent from death by fire. Yes, I poured napalm on behalf of the prosecutors and the judges and the jury's children and grandchildren, If my way of putting the facts is inadmissible, then so be it. But I was trying to be concrete about death, because death is a concrete fact, as I have throughout my life tried to be concrete about the existence of God, who is not an abstraction, but is someone before me for whom I am responsible.
I ask you, Daniel Berrigan, was your action at Catonsville a way of carrying out your religious beliefs?
I'm going to have to instruct the jury that under the law, which is binding on me, and therefore on this jury as well, the fact that he may be following his religious principles is not a defense if it is found that a crime has been committed.
May I say, Your Honor, that if my religious belief is not accepted as a substantial part of my action, then the action is eviscerated of all meaning, and I should be committed for insanity.
Father Berrigan, did you not write a statement on Catonsville?
Yes, a meditation written just before the action.
Would you read it?
Our apologies, good friends, for the fracture of good order, for the burning of paper instead of children, the angering of the orderlies in the front parlor of the charnel house. We could not, so help us God, do otherwise, for we are sick at heart. Our hearts give us no rest for thinking of the land of burning children, and for thinking of that other child of whom the poet Luke speaks. This child is set for the fall and rise of many in Israel, a sign that is spoken against. Small consolation, a child born to make trouble and to die for it. The first Jew, not the last to be subject of a definitive solution. So, we stretch out our hands to our brothers and sisters throughout the world. We, who are priests, to our fellow priests, all of us, who break the law, turn to the poor of the world, to the Vietnamese, to the children, the victims, to the soldiers who kill and die for the wrong reasons, for no reason at all, because they were so ordered by the authorities of that public order, which is in effect a massive institutionalized disorder. We say killing is disorder. Life and gentleness and community and unselfishness is the only order we recognize. It is for the sake of that order that we risk our liberty, our good name. And time is past when good people can remain silent, when obedience can segregate all of us from public risk, when the poor can die without defense. How many indeed must die before our voices are heard? How many must be tortured, dislocated, maimed, starved, maddened? How long will the world's resources be raped in the service of legalized murder? When? At what point will we say no to the war? We have chosen to say, with the gift of our liberty, if necessary, our lives, the violence stops here. The suppression of the truth stops here. The war stops here. Redeem the times. The times are inexpressibly evil. And yet the times are inexhaustibly good, solaced by the hope and courage of many. The truth rules. Christ is not forsaken. In a time of death, some men and women, peace workers and resistors, those who work heartily for social change, preach and embrace the truth. In the jaws of death, they proclaim their love of the brethren. We think of such men and women in the world, in our churches, in our communities, and the stone in our breast is dissolved. and we take heart once more.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Is the government ready to make its final statement?
The government is ready, Your Honor. May it please the court, members of the jury. It is now my responsibility to attempt, in summary fashion, to review with you the evidence that has been produced in this courtroom. First of all, I want it clearly understood that the government is not about to put itself in the position, has not heretofore, and is not now, of conducting its policies at the end of a string tied to the consciences of these 9 defendants. This trial does not include the issues of the Vietnam conflict. It does not include the issue of whether the United States ought to be in that conflict or out of it. The government quite candidly admits that the position these defendants took is reasonable as to the fact that the war is illegal, that it is immoral, that it is against religious principles, that any reasonable person could take that view. We do not even say that a person has to be insane to have the views that they have. No, we don't say that. But this prosecution is the government's response, the law's response, the people's response to what the defendants did. And what they did was to take government property and throw flammable material on it and burn it beyond recognition. And that is what this case is about. Suppose you were to acquit these people on the only basis possible in view of everything they have conceded. Acquit them, that is, although they did those acts with the intention of hindering the selective service system and of burning the files and records. Suppose that because of their sincerity, their conscience, their religious convictions, they were entitled to be acquitted in this courtroom. If these people were entitled to be acquitted by virtue of their sincerity and religion and conviction, then according to the same logic, should not the man who commits any other crime be also entitled to acquittal? Doesn't that sound fair? We also heard about unpleasant things happening or about to happen in other areas of the world. Among these 9 defendants, there are 4 or 5 justifications floating around. One defendant is upset about one ill in the world, and that justifies his going to Catonsville. Another is upset about another ill in the world, and each of them could say, "This is why I violated the law." Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the government has never contended that this country is perfect, that it is without flaw, without ills or problems or failings. To assert that would be absurd, but I would suggest to you that to the extent this country has problems, those problems will be solved. We will progress. We will get better. The country will get better. But our problems are not going to be solved by people who deliberately violate our laws, the foundation and support for an ordered and just and civilized society. It is your sworn duty to assert, by finding these defendants guilty, that our problems will not be solved, but will be increased beyond imagining by people who deliberately violate the law under which we all live. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Undoubtedly, a great measure of personal reflection is required, even to begin to appreciate the meaning of this trial for us who participated in it. I must beg your leave to inject a personal note. In law school, I was repeatedly warned never to identify too closely with prospective clients. Perhaps under other circumstances, this might be considered sound advice. For myself, I must confess with more pride than I could adequately describe, I have come to love and respect the men and women who stand before this court. The court has agreed that this is a unique case. It shares the historic meaning of other great contests of law. The trial of Socrates was not merely a question of a man sowing confusion and distrust among the youth of Athens. The trial of Jesus could not be reduced to one of conspiracy against the empire. In a parallel way, there are overriding issues at stake in this case. In the first place, we agree with the prosecutor. The defendants did participate in the burning of the records. But it is not a question of records which are independent of life. We're not talking about driving licenses or licenses to operate a brewery. We are speaking of one kind of records. No others so directly affect life and death on a mass scale. They affect every mother's son and daughter who is registered with any board. These records stand quite literally for life and death to young men and women. The government has also conceded that it is reasonable to hold the views held by the defendants as to the illegality of this war. This is a concession of far-reaching legal and political significance. For if it is reasonable for an American to believe that the war is illegal, then it has to be equally reasonable for them to take the necessary steps to stop the illegality. Ultimately, you and I and the people in this courtroom are the owners of these selective service files. We have entrusted their use to a government agency, but that agency is only our instrument. When their use is perverted to destroy innocent life, the files no longer have a right to exist. So we come to the only issue left for you to decide whether, in your opinion, they are guilty or innocent of a crime.